Lieutenant Jason Cole barely remembered how he ended up here, bleeding, broken, and barely alive on a battlefield littered with wreckage. The war between humanity and the Zerethians had been raging for years, but this skirmish was supposed to be a simple one. A quick ambush, a victory, and an extraction. It had gone horribly wrong. The Zerethians were stronger, faster, and had superior technology. Jason had fought hard, but their warships had torn through his squad's defenses like paper. Now, lying on the cold ground, he could hear the faint crackling of fires and the distant hum of enemy ships scanning for survivors. He knew what would happen if they found him. The Zerethians never took human prisoners, but fate had other plans. Through the smoke, a tall figure approached. Jason forced his eyes to focus. The alien wore a sleek black and silver combat suit, her armor gleaming under the dim light of the burning wreckage. Her skin was a deep shade of blue, her features sharp and regal. A Zerethian captain. Jason gritted his teeth, preparing for the end, but instead of raising a weapon, she knelt beside him. Captain Iliara studied the dying human with a conflicted expression. Zerethian protocol was clear: leave the wounded to die, especially humans. They were the enemy. Yet something about this one made her pause. He had fought fiercely. She had seen him take down 3 of her warriors before falling. There was strength in him, and he was still breathing. With a swift movement, Iliara pressed a device to his chest. Jason gasped as a strange energy surged through his body. His pain dulled, and his vision cleared slightly. His heartbeat slowed, steadying. What did you do?" he croaked. Iliara's expression was unreadable. "I saved your life." Jason wanted to thank her, but before he could, darkness swallowed him. When Jason woke again, the air smelled different, clean, metallic. He wasn't on the battlefield anymore. He was inside a ship. The soft hum of engines vibrated beneath him. He tried to sit up, but a sharp pain shot through his body. That's when he noticed it. A glowing mark on his chest, pulsing faintly. He reached out to touch it, but a voice stopped him. "Don't," Iliara said, standing near the door. Jason looked at her, confused. "What did you do to me?" She hesitated before answering. "I used a life bond to heal you." Life bond. The word sent a chill down his spine. "It means," Iliara said slowly, "your life is now tied to mine. If I die, you die." Jason's breath caught in his throat. He wasn't just a prisoner. He was bound to her forever. Jason stared at the alien woman, his mind struggling to understand her words. "Bound to you," he repeated, his voice hoarse. Iliara gave a slow nod, her golden eyes watching him carefully. "Yes, the life bond is permanent." Jason's heart pounded. He wanted to believe this was a nightmare, but the strange warmth in his chest told him otherwise. He lifted his trembling hand to the glowing mark, feeling a faint pulse under his fingertips, like a second heartbeat. His head spun. He was a soldier, a fighter, trained for war. But now he was tied to an enemy captain. His enemy. "No," Jason said, shaking his head. This isn't real. Undo it." Iliara's expression hardened. "I cannot." Jason forced himself to sit up, wincing as his body protested. He scanned the room. Sleek metal walls, dim blue lights, and a small bed that was too smooth to be human-made. He was on a Zerethian warship, deep in enemy territory. Trapped. Jason clenched his fists. "Why did you do this?" Iliara exhaled, as if she had asked herself the same question 100 times. "You were dying," she said simply. "I had no choice." "No choice." Jason let out a bitter laugh. "You could have left me there." Her jaw tightened. "I don't abandon warriors who fight with honor." Jason fell silent. He had expected cruelty from the Zerethians, maybe even torture. But this was something else. A soft beep sounded from the wall. Iliara glanced at it and straightened. "We have arrived at the main fleet." Jason's stomach twisted. If they had reached the Zarethian capital ships, that meant one thing. He was about to face an entire army of his enemies, and he had no idea what they would do to him. Minutes later, 2 armored Zarethian guards escorted Jason through the ship's glowing corridors. The alien metal felt cold under his boots, the air too crisp, too sterile. He ignored the glares from passing crew members, though he could feel their hatred burning into him. They stopped in front of a massive door. Iliara stood tall beside him, her expression unreadable. "Stay quiet," she warned. "Let me handle this." Before Jason could respond, the doors slid open, revealing a vast command chamber. Zarethian officers stood in a semicircle, their robes dark and their eyes sharp. At the center was a tall male, his silver armor shining under the dim lights. His gaze locked onto Jason like a predator spotting weak prey. "Iliara," the man said, his voice cold. "Explain yourself." Iliara took a deep breath. "This human lives because of me." The officers murmured among themselves. The leader's eyes narrowed. "You have violated our laws." Jason's fists clenched. He wasn't sure what punishment Iliara would face, but one thing was certain. If she suffered for saving him, he wouldn't just stand by and watch. Jason stood still, his body tense as the Zarethian officers whispered among themselves. He didn't understand their language, but their expressions were clear: anger, disgust, and a hint of disbelief. The leader, the tall male in silver armor, stepped forward. His piercing gaze shifted between Iliara and Jason. "You brought a human onto our ship. Worse, you bonded with him." Iliara's face remained calm. "I did what was necessary to save a warrior's life." The officer sneered. "A human's life." Jason clenched his fists but forced himself to stay silent. He wasn't stupid. He was deep in enemy territory, surrounded by aliens who would rather see him dead. If he said the wrong thing, he'd make things worse, for both himself and Iliara. The officer turned his gaze to Jason. "Do you understand what you are now, human?" Jason didn't answer. The Zarethian's lips curled into something close to a smirk. "You are not a prisoner. You are not a guest. You are a burden." Jason's jaw tightened, but before he could speak, Iliara stepped in front of him. "I will take full responsibility for him," she said firmly. The officer's eyes gleamed. "Then if he fails, if he brings dishonor to this ship, it will be on your head." Iliara didn't hesitate. "I accept." Jason frowned. What the hell had he just witnessed? Some kind of trial. A test. The officer gave one final look at Jason before turning away. "Then take your pet and get him out of my sight." Jason bristled but held his tongue. He had survived this long. He wasn't about to get himself killed because of his temper. Iliara led Jason down the quiet corridors of the ship. The halls were vast, lined with smooth silver walls and glowing symbols he couldn't read. It felt too clean, too perfect. Nothing like the rough metal of human warships. "Where are we going?" Jason asked. "To your quarters," Iliara said without looking at him. Jason scoffed. "You mean my cell?" Iliara finally turned to face him, her expression unreadable. "You are not a prisoner." Jason folded his arms. "Then what am I?" Iliara hesitated for the briefest moment. "You are. Mine to protect." Jason blinked. Of all the answers he had expected, that wasn't one of them. Before he could respond, they reached a door. It slid open, revealing a small but comfortable room. Sleek metallic walls, a narrow bed, and a single screen displaying alien symbols. Definitely not a prison cell. Iliara stepped aside. "Rest. You will need your strength." Jason frowned. "For what?" Her golden eyes met his. "To survive." With that, she left, the door hissing shut behind her. Jason exhaled, running a hand through his hair. He had fought in battles, faced death countless times. But something told him this was only the beginning. Jason lay on the narrow bed, staring at the ceiling. Sleep refused to come. His body still ached from the battle, but that wasn't what kept him awake. It was the life bond. He could feel it, an invisible connection tying him to Ilyara. It wasn't painful, but it was there, like a second heartbeat, always in the background. The thought made his stomach twist. He wasn't free anymore. He sighed and sat up. Staying in this room wasn't an option. He needed answers. The door slid open as soon as he approached. Either Ilyara trusted him, or she knew he had nowhere to run. Probably both. The shit's halls were quiet, but he could feel the eyes of passing Zarethians on him. Their stares ranged from curiosity to outright hostility. He kept walking, pretending not to notice. When he reached the command deck, 2 armored guards blocked his way. "You do not belong here, human," one of them growled. Jason crossed his arms. "I need to talk to your captain." The guards glanced at each other, but didn't move. Before Jason could push his luck, Ilyara's voice came from behind him. "Let him through." The guards hesitated, but after a moment, they stepped aside. Jason followed Ilyara into the war room. She turned to face him. "You should be resting." Jason ignored her concern. "What happens now? Am I just supposed to stay here forever?" Ilyara studied him. "You have no other choice." Jason scowled. "There's always a choice." Ilyara's expression remained calm. "Is there?" Jason opened his mouth to argue, but she stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You are not safe here. Many of my crew believe you should be executed." Jason tensed. He had expected resentment, but execution. That was worse than he thought. "I didn't ask for this bond," he said, voice tight. "Neither did I," Ilyara replied. Silence stretched between them. Finally, Jason exhaled. "So what do we do?" Ilyara glanced at the large screen behind her, displaying maps of the fleet's movements. "We prove that you are not a weakness." Jason raised an eyebrow. "And how do we do that?" A faint smirk touched Ilyara's lips. "You're a soldier, aren't you?" Jason's eyes narrowed. "Yeah." "Then fight." An hour later, Jason stood in the training arena, surrounded by Zarethian warriors. Some watched with amusement, others with open hostility. Ilyara stood at the edge, arms crossed. A large Zarethian male stepped forward, cracking his knuckles. "The human wants to prove himself," he sneered. "Fine. Let's see if he lasts more than a minute." Jason rolled his shoulders. He wasn't as strong or fast as these aliens, but he wasn't about to back down. He had something to prove, not just to them, but to himself. The fight began. Jason barely had time to react before the Zarethian warrior lunged at him. The alien was fast, too fast. Jason ducked, barely avoiding a punch that could have shattered his skull. He rolled to the side, breathing hard. The Zarethians were bigger, stronger, and faster than humans. This wasn't a fair fight. But war was never fair. Jason steadied his stance, remembering his training. He couldn't win with brute strength, but he could be smart. The warrior charged again, but this time, Jason sidestepped and drove his elbow into the alien's ribs. It wasn't much, but it made the warrior stumble. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. The warrior snarled and swung again. Jason ducked under the blow and landed a quick jab to the alien's side. He was faster than they expected, but not fast enough. A powerful kick slammed into Jason's chest, sending him flying. He hit the ground hard, gasping for air. His vision blurred. The warrior loomed over him, ready to finish the fight. Then something strange happened. A sudden rush of energy surged through Jason's body. His pain dulled, his vision sharpened. He moved without thinking, rolling away just as the warrior's fist came crashing down. He felt it now, the life bond. It wasn't just a link between him and Ilyara. It was enhancing him, making him stronger, faster. Jason grinned. "All right, let's try that again." He sprang to his feet and attacked. 15 minutes later, Jason stood over the unconscious warrior, breathing heavily. The training arena was silent. No one had expected him to win. Jason wiped sweat from his brow and looked at Ilyara. She gave a small nod, approval, respect. But not everyone was impressed. One of the Zarethian officers stepped forward, his expression cold. "This does not change what he is," he said. "A human. An outsider. A threat." Jason tensed. Something about the way the officer spoke felt off. Ilyara's gaze hardened. He is part of this crew now. The officer's eyes flickered with something dangerous before he stepped back. For now. Jason didn't like that answer. As the crowd dispersed, he turned to Ilyara. "That guy doesn't trust me," she sighed. "There are those who believe I made a mistake saving you." Jason frowned. "And that officer?" Ilyara hesitated. "Commander Veclan. He is powerful and ambitious." Jason crossed his arms. "And you think he's up to something?" Ilyara's eyes met his. "I don't think, Jason. I know." Jason felt a chill run down his spine. Surviving a fight was one thing. Surviving whatever came next, that was another battle entirely. Jason paced inside his quarters, his mind racing. He had won the fight, but that didn't mean he was safe. Commander Veclan's words echoed in his head. For now, Jason had seen men like Veclan before, dangerous, power-hungry, the kind who didn't tolerate threats, and right now, Jason was the biggest threat on this ship. The door hissed open, and Ilyara stepped in. "You shouldn't worry," she said, crossing her arms. Jason scoffed. "Worry? The guy basically said he's coming for me." Ilyara sighed. "Veclan is not a fool. He won't move against you openly." Jason studied her. "But he will move." Ilyara hesitated, then gave a slow nod. "Yes." Jason exhaled, running a hand through his hair. "Great, just great." Ilyara stepped closer. "That is why you must be ready." Jason frowned. "For what?" Ilyara's golden eyes locked onto his. "A war within this ship." Later that night, Jason lay on his bed, staring at the ceiling. He couldn't sleep. Every instinct in his body screamed that something was coming. And he was right. A soft click sounded near the door. Jason tensed. That wasn't the usual door mechanism. It was someone overriding the lock. He moved fast. Just as the door slid open, Jason grabbed a metal tray from the table and flung it at the shadowy figure entering. The assassin barely dodged. But Jason wasn't done. He lunged, tackling the intruder to the ground. They struggled, but Jason had the advantage of surprise. He grabbed the alien's wrist, twisting it until a small blade clattered to the floor. Jason pressed his knee into the assassin's chest. "Who sent you?" The intruder snarled, baring sharp teeth. "You don't belong here, human." Jason narrowed his eyes. "Veclan." The assassin smirked. That was all the confirmation Jason needed. Before he could say another word, a loud hiss filled the room. The assassin's body jerked, and then went limp. Jason's breath caught. A tiny dart was stuck in the alien's neck. Poison. Someone had silenced him. Jason turned, scanning the hallway outside his room, but it was empty. Whoever had killed the assassin was already gone. His heart pounded. This wasn't just a warning. This was a message. Veclan wasn't going to wait. The war had already begun. The next morning, Jason stood beside Ilyara in the war room, his jaw tight. He told her everything. She listened in silence, her expression unreadable. Then, finally, she spoke. "You were right," she said. "Veclan is making his move." Jason sighed. "What now?" Ilyara's golden eyes burned with determination. "Now," she said, "we fight back." Jason smirked. "Finally, something I'm good at." Jason stood in the war room, his fists clenched. Ilyara had just confirmed what he already knew. Veclan was coming for them. And he wasn't going to wait for an invitation. Ilyara turned to the control panel, her fingers dancing over the glowing symbols. A holographic map of the ship appeared in front of them. "Veclan controls a third of the crew," she said. "Loyalists to me make up another third." Jason frowned. "And the rest?" Iliara's jaw tightened. "They will follow whoever seems strongest." Jason exhaled. "So if we don't make the first move?" "He will," she finished. Jason smirked. "Then let's hit him before he expects it." Iliara gave a sharp nod. Agreed. The plan was simple. Veclan operated from the lower decks, using the maintenance sector as his base. Jason and Iliara would leave a small team to cut off his command before he could rally more support. But plans rarely survive the battlefield. As Jason crouched behind a metal crate, blaster in hand, alarms blared through the ship. "They know we're coming," he muttered. Iliara, beside him, checked her weapon. "Then we move fast." She gave a silent signal, and their squad of loyal warriors advanced through the dimly lit corridor. Jason stayed close to Iliara, his instincts sharp. A sudden crack rang through the hall. Sparks flew as blaster fire rained down on them. "Ambush," someone shouted. Jason didn't think, he acted. He dove behind a pillar, firing back. The enemy was dug in, using overturned crates as cover. "We need to flank them," Jason yelled. Iliara nodded, barking orders in Zarethian. Two of their warriors broke off, disappearing down a side passage. Jason focused on the fight. He wasn't as fast as the Zarethians, but he was a soldier, and soldiers adapted. He aimed for weak points, knees, shoulders, anything to slow the enemy down. Then he saw him. Veclan. The commander stood at the far end of the corridor, watching with cold eyes. Jason's grip tightened on his blaster. "Iliara, he's here." Iliara followed his gaze. Their eyes met, and no words were needed. This was their chance. "Cover me," Jason said, already moving. He sprinted forward, dodging enemy fire. The life bond thrummed inside him, fueling his speed. A shot barely missed his head, but he kept going. Veclan turned, retreating into the shadows. Not this time. Jason pushed harder, chasing after him. He didn't know what he'd do when he caught up. Punch him. Shoot him. Maybe both. But before he could reach Veclan, a massive explosion rocked the corridor. Jason was thrown backward, crashing hard against the floor. His vision blurred. The last thing he saw before blacking out was Iliara rushing toward him, calling his name. Jason's body ached as he pushed himself up. Smoke filled the corridor, and alarms blared through the ship. The explosion had been powerful, but he was still alive. He turned his head and saw Iliara kneeling beside him, her golden eyes filled with concern. "You're awake," she said, relief in her voice. Jason grunted. "Barely. What the hell happened?" Iliara helped him to his feet. Veclan set a trap. He escaped before the explosion. Jason cursed. Of course he did. The ship shook again, but this time it wasn't from an explosion. It was something worse. Iliara's expression darkened. That was the main engines. Jason's stomach twisted. "He's sabotaging the ship." Iliara nodded. "If the engines fail completely, we will be stranded in deep space." Jason took a deep breath. He had survived countless battles, but this was different. If they didn't act fast, everyone on board, enemy or not, was going to die. They moved quickly, leading a small squad toward the engineering sector. Jason's mind raced. Veclan wasn't just trying to kill them. He was willing to destroy the entire ship. That meant one thing. "He has an escape plan," Jason said as they moved through the corridors. Iliara glanced at him. "What do you mean?" "He wouldn't risk blowing up the ship unless he had a way out." "He's running." Iliara's eyes narrowed. "Then we stop him before he escapes." Jason smirked. "Now you're thinking like a soldier." When they reached the engineering deck, the damage was worse than expected. Fires burned along the walls, and the air was thick with smoke. Crew members worked desperately to control the destruction. At the far end of the room, Veclan stood near an emergency shuttle bay. He turned as Jason and Ilyara approached, his expression calm, as if he had already won. "You're too late," he said. Jason raised his blaster. "I really hate it when people say that." Veclan smirked. "Kill me, and the ship still dies." Ilyara stepped forward. "You betrayed your own people." Veclan laughed. "I did what was necessary. You were weak, Captain. You let a human control you." Jason's finger tightened on the trigger. "She saved my life. Something you obviously don't understand." Veclan's eyes burned with hatred. "She cursed you. That bond is a sickness." Jason exchanged a glance with Ilyara. He didn't fully understand the life bond, but he knew one thing. It had saved his life, and it had given him a purpose. "I'd rather have this bond," Jason said, stepping forward, "than be a coward like you." Veclan's expression twisted in fury. He reached for his weapon. But Jason was faster. He fired. The blast struck Veclan square in the chest. The traitor staggered, his eyes wide in shock, before collapsing. The fight was over. But the battle for survival had just begun. Veclan's lifeless body hit the ground, smoke rising from the wound in his chest. For a moment, silence filled the engineering deck. Jason lowered his blaster, his heart pounding. It was over. Ilyara stepped forward, standing over Veclan's body. There was no triumph in her eyes, only cold determination. She turned to the remaining crew members, her voice firm. "Secure the engines. Now." The engineers rushed to work, stabilizing the systems before the ship could spiral into destruction. Jason let out a breath. "Did we stop it in time?" he asked. One of the engineers checked the control panel. "The engines are damaged, but we can still reach a nearby station." Jason nodded. "Good enough." Minutes later, Jason and Ilyara stood on the bridge, looking out at the vastness of space. The battle was over, but the consequences remained. Ilyara glanced at him. "You didn't hesitate." Jason smirked. "I've learned that hesitation gets you killed." She studied him for a moment. "You are not the same man I saved." Jason exhaled. "Guess I'm not." He looked down at his hands, flexing them. He could still feel the life bond, the strange energy connecting him to Ilyara. It had changed him in ways he didn't fully understand. And yet, he no longer saw it as a curse. "Ilyara," he said, "what happens now?" She was quiet for a moment before speaking. "You still have a choice." Jason frowned. "Do I?" She turned to him, her golden eyes meeting his. "You could leave. Find your own path. The bond will not force you to stay." Jason chuckled. "After all this, you really think I'd just walk away?" Ilyara tilted her head. "Would you?" Jason sighed, looking out at the stars. He had been a soldier, a survivor, a prisoner. And now he was something more. He turned back to Ilyara and grinned. "Nah, I think I'll stick around." A rare smile touched her lips. Jason leaned against the console. "Besides, someone has to watch your back." Ilyara raised an eyebrow. "I was watching your back." Jason laughed. "Then I guess we make a good team." The ship, damaged but still flying, moved forward through the void. They had won this battle, but the universe was still out there, dangerous, unpredictable. And Jason was ready for whatever came next.